Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. Welcome to today's Scrum Pulse. Stop pretending to be agile with PST Mary Iqbal. I'm Lindsay Vellicina. I'm from scrum.org and I'll be your moderator today. Mary, can you hit the next slide? A few quick things before we get started. This session is being recorded and will be made available within 24 hours, so with slides. So look forward to that. And you will be muted throughout the webinar, but we do want you to please ask questions. We are going to have time for Q&A, so please enter those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as they come up, and we will get those addressed for you. And yeah, that is that. We also have the chat function at the bottom of your screen, and you can type in any technical questions that you have in there to me, and I can help you out. So next slide. So a little bit about scrum.org. We are the home of Scrum. We were founded by Ken Schwaber in 2009. He's the co-creator of Scrum. Our mission is to help people and teams solve complex problems by improving how they work through higher levels of professionalism. We are focused on helping people learn through free online resources and activity-based live training led by our more than 340 professional Scrum trainers around the globe. We also have our professional Scrum certification tests that allow folks to validate their knowledge through our certification. And we support people wherever they are on their learning journey. So I hope that this session today is part of that journey. And with that, I will hand it over to Mary.
Thank you, Lindsay. For those of you who don't know me, first, I'm thrilled to be here with all of you today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mary Iqbal. I am the Agile Transformation Manager at WPS Health Insurance, which is one of the largest health benefits providers in the state of Wisconsin. We have more than 4,000 employees. And I am also a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org. I am the founder of Rebel Scrum, which offers public and private training classes. My upcoming classes include professional Agile leadership, which is scheduled to start December 6th and is being offered as 4 half-day classes from noon to 4 Central Standard Time. And I'm also have a professional Scrum Master as an upcoming class, which is being offered as a 2-day class on January 20th and 21st. You can find more classes at my website, rebelscrum.site, or you can find me on scrum.org/Mary-Iqbal. Love to hear from you with any questions and comments after today's session. So I want to start by talking about the growth in the adoption of Agile globally. You see before you kind of a snapshot comparing the 15th annual State of Agile report with figures taken from the 14th annual State of Agile report. This report is from digital.ai. It is the longest continuous Agile survey in the industry. This 15th annual report had over 5,000 responses from 100 companies. Just to give you a couple of metrics so you kind of know the context of the data that you're looking at. 2 in 5 of the respondents were from companies with 1,000 employees or less. A quarter of the respondents were working in companies with over 20,000 employees. And 1/3 of the respondents say that the software organization is between 100 and 1,000 people, and 1/3 say it's less, 1/3 say it's more. So it's a nice balance, if you ask me, in terms of the types of respondents. It comes from, respondents come from around the world, from 100 companies. So it's a very well-balanced set of data. And what this data is telling us is that the adoption of Scrum and really all Agile methods continues to grow. So compared to 2020 to 2021, we went from 37% of software development organizations within companies had adopted Agile to 86%, a huge growth in 2021. This data was gathered in February and April of 2021, so it's very fresh. We see a huge growth in Agile. And this rapid growth undoubtedly means that many, or at least I suspect that many individuals practicing Scrum have likely not received formal training in it. So it's the perfect environment for misinformation and confusion. And that's why we're going back to basics with today's class. So I want to talk about what is Scrum founded on. Scrum is it's easy to understand. It's a simple framework, but it is hard to master. Scrum is founded on the idea of empiricism, which we're going to talk about next. But empiricism is making decisions based on what is known. And it's also founded on lean, which, among other things, is limiting waste or reducing waste. So it's a very practical framework. And we need to consider this element of its foundations when you're applying Scrum. It's easy to go out there and start doing the daily Scrum and start doing sprint planning without thinking about the why behind the framework. And the why is really important. So I want to talk a little bit about just the empiricism side of the house. So let's look at empiricism. Empiricism means making decisions based on what is known, experimenting, using data, and using practical approaches when you're applying the Scrum framework. So empiricism is based on transparency, which means we all know what's going on. We have clearly open and we understand the state of the artifacts. It's based upon inspection, the idea that we're going to inspect what we're delivering frequently. And those who are doing the work are going to look at what they've done and check their work on a regular basis. And it's based on adaptation, which is the idea that we're going to adapt to changing circumstances. We're going to replan, and we're going to plan again, and then we're going to plan again. And we're going to change based on what is known. So we're going to try things out. We're going to inspect them, see if it works, and then we're going to adapt based on what we learn. So that's empiricism, and it's very important when you're applying your Scrum framework and throughout that process. When you have a question that comes up, should I do this or should I do that? Think about empiricism when you make your decision. Am I being transparent? Am I allowing people to inspect the work? Am I open to adapting based on what information is learned? Empiricism is it's the foundation on which Scrum is formed. So I want to talk a little bit about some signs of pretending to be agile, right? Our speech today, our class today is talking about pretending to be agile. So what do I mean by pretending to be agile? I mean that we're using the framework, right? But we're not understanding the underpinnings of Scrum. So for example, we're not really fully embracing transparency. We're not fully embracing the idea that we should be adapting based on what is learned. We're not fully embracing the idea that we're inspecting the work and we're using that inspection to adapt. So there's some signs that a team is doing this, that we've really just adopted Scrum as window dressing, I like to say. So there are some signs. And when you've adopted Scrum as window dressing, that means that you're using the framework, but you're not really understanding the underpinnings of it. So some signs of some signs of pretending to be agile include the product is not aligned to the customer. We're going to talk about that. It also includes we're not delivering a done usable increment on a frequent basis. We're also, another sign could be low predictability. We're unable to forecast. Very important. Scrum it is important that we're able to forecast deliverables in the future. And then I think one of the more easy ones to spot is events do not result in adaptation, that we're not learning and we're not changing. We're not getting better as we go. So I want to talk about each one of those in a little bit more detail. The first one is Scrum is based on iterative incremental delivery of product. So have you defined your product? Have you talked to your team? Have you talked about what is the product? So the reason this is important is, Dave West, CEO of Scrum.org, actually stated in the State of Agile webinar with this 15th annual State of Agile report was released. He made a statement which I completely agree with, which is the most successful Agile teams are the ones that know their customers and they're clearly aligned to them. And he went on to say that the unsuccessful organizations are the ones that do agility. The teams have, 57 customers, but they haven't just defined, what's our main target customer, right? They've got all kinds of different competing priorities. There's a mishmash of services. They can't even define a sprint goal because they don't know who their customer is. They don't have a line of sight into the value that they're providing. It's a confusing state. And I think a lot of us have been there. the reason I say that this impacts transparency is being aligned to the customer adds transparency to what are our goals. How do we align ourselves to those goals? How do we align ourselves to our customers' goals? And then when we inspect the work that's been delivered, does it align to our customers' needs? And then when we adapt, we're always thinking about what's important to my customer and how can I better serve them? So defining the product is a key element of transparency. This idea of knowing who I'm delivering this work for, so that I can set goals that align to the customer's needs, so that I can set metrics that measure my progress against those goals, so that I can inspect the metrics and understand what impact am I having, right? What impact am I having on my customer? So that I can hear directly from the customer, what impact are we having on that customer? And based on that information, so that we can discuss it at the sprint review, potentially with our customer. At the sprint retrospective, we can collaborate with the Scrum team. How do we identify and capitalize on improvement opportunities? And that all comes back to empiricism. So defining the customer is a key element which supports empiricism, which helps us live empiricism. So you may be asking yourself, how do I define my customer? So when you're defining the customer, how do I define my customer? When you're defining your product, when you're talking about what is the product that I'm offering, you start with who's my customer. The reason for that is the customer impacts how I describe my product. So for example, if the customer is a car manufacturer, then my product might be tires, engine, windows, glass. If the customer is a consumer or a commuter, right, the customer might be the car. If the customer is a new car dealership, the product might be the floor plan. So sometimes, and I can experience this, it seems like you should know what your product is, but it's not always obvious in organizations where things have become muddled. It's not always obvious who your customer is. So take a step back. The customer can be an internal customer, it can be an external customer, but there's always a customer. So think about when you're asking yourself, who's my customer? Who's the one who's using? Who's the one who's ultimately buying this product? And that's going to help point the way for you. I know that, it seems like it would be obvious, but it's not actually in organizations. It's not always obvious. So take a step back, bring a group of people together, a cross-functional group of people together. If it's not clear to you who the customer is, talk it through. But always start with who's the customer, and that's going to help you define your product. There's lots of great ways to help you define your product. I'm listing a few here, but we're not going to go into them in a great deal of detail. There's value stream mapping, which means mapping all the steps from request to value delivery. There's identifying business capabilities, which means what are the capabilities that I want to have in my product. There's the business value canvas. I like the one from strategizer.com. There's lots of ways to define product vision. All of these tools can help you better define your customer. So just briefly, value stream mapping means taking all those steps from when somebody has requested. So for example, when someone's ordered pizza, right? What are all the steps that are taken from when that pizza is ordered to when the person's eating the pizza? And that can help you define your product. That helps you understand what are all the elements of my product. I think it's a great tool for helping you to understand and define the boundaries of your product. Another option is business capabilities. Thinking about, well, what are all the capabilities associated with my product, right? There's the phone system, right? There's the online ordering system. What are all those capabilities that make up my product? Is another great way to think about it. I also like the business model canvas, which is discussed in our professional Scrum product owner class. We cover some discussions about the business model canvas, and also the product goal canvas is included. It's a great class. I highly recommend that. Professional Scrum product owner. But another way to define your product is the business model canvas. It's really helpful to sit down and think about who are my customer segments, where are my revenue streams. It really helps you define and think about what are the limits of my product. So I find this an extremely helpful tool. And then creating a vision for your product also, I think, helps crystallize very briefly, what is my product? So another great tool for that is also discussed in the professional Scrum product owner class is a vision statement. an elevator pitch, right? For my target audience who needs whatever it is. My product name is whatever it is that provides one key benefit. Unlike our competition, our product does this. So it seems very simple, but doing this, in fact, I have done this, right, multiple times. Doing this really helps you summarize in a very brief way, what is my product? What are my key benefits? What is it that we're offering to our customer? And when you can articulate that very succinctly, very briefly, it helps you to understand and set clearer goals for your product. And again, all of that impacts transparency. When you have clear goals, you can inspect our progress against those goals, and you can adapt based on how are we measuring? How are we getting to those goals? So defining that product to me is one of the first steps. It's really important to making sure that we're not just using Scrum as window dressing. We are thinking about it from an empirical standpoint. We are measuring our progress and we're adapting based on that progress. So I want to take a moment and ask you, right? All of you, we're going to open a poll here in a second. And I'm going to ask you, have you actually defined your product? Whatever that you're working on today, has your team put thought into the product? I'm not saying you have to have used one of these particular tools, right? Although it'd be great if you had, but have you put some thought into what our product is? And have you defined that product? So you should see the poll open there on your screen. I'm going to give you just a couple of moments to answer that poll. Has your team defined your product, your current product?
Okay, and while we're waiting for that to come in, Mary, there's a question that came in. Someone had asked, how do you define sprint goals when team members are completing very different areas of work? So for example, developers are working on their part of the journey. Mm-hmm. Compliance is working on a risk piece, and finance working on forecasting.
Great question. Great question. That is such an important question. I love to hear you talking about sprint goals. So for those of you who don't know, the sprint goal is something that is established at the sprint planning meeting. Every sprint should have a sprint goal that provides focus for the sprint. And as to how you define your goals, everybody may be working on different elements, but we should all be working towards the same goal. So for example, you may have developers working, you may have testers working, but we're working towards the same thing. So whatever is the most important thing for your sprint, that is your sprint goal. Whatever the thing is that your customer most is looking for, or you're most trying to accomplish, that is your sprint goal. So sometimes I may have in a sprint, it's not ideal, but I may have different things that we're working on. I'll pick the most important, or the team will pick the most important as the sprint goal. That is something that, by the way, the team collaborates upon. The product owner can come in with the business objective. The team comes in with, here's the things we think we can actually accomplish. And together they collaborate on what is our goal for the sprint.
Great, thank you. So our results are in, so I will go ahead and share those.
All right, so fantastic, 67%, that is fantastic. So a majority of you have defined your product. That is wonderful. And then 33% have not defined their product. So for that 33%, I encourage you to take one of these tools and put some thought into what are the limits, the start and end of my product. I encourage you to come to the Professional Scrum Product Owner class. There's great discussion on that very topic. And for those of you who have defined your product, fantastic, congratulations. I'd highly recommend you also, once you have defined your product, start thinking about what's my product goal? What are we trying to accomplish? And then think about what metrics we can measure, what metrics we can use to measure our progress towards that sprint goal. So another great class for that is evidence-based management or professional agile leadership. Both are great classes to discuss that very topic. All right, thank you for that. Okay, so we're going to close out this section with just a brief conversation on some risks associated with defining your product. If you define your product, and this comes from the Professional Product Owner book, it's one of my favorite books, which is available on Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble. It's a really great book. But some risk with defining your product too narrowly. include unnecessary dependencies. So for example, if I have a car, right, and my product is a commuter, and I define my product as the window, right? So I've got this team of folks focusing on the window. I've created unnecessary dependencies where the window team may have to wait for a couple of sprints while the door team figures out the size of the window, right? So you've created unnecessary dependencies where if they're all working together, we can all work on the highest priority work, which brings us to our next dependency, next issue, which is working on low value features. If I've defined my product too narrowly, we may have the best window ever, but the engine may not work. So working on low value features has another impact of potentially defining your product too narrowly. You've got a lot of handoffs if you define your product too narrowly, where the window team has to hand off the window to the door team, right? Whereas if we're all working together, we would all be working together. You also lose your focus on the customer when you have defined your product too narrowly. And that's what I was talking about earlier, right? If you define your product too narrowly, and you may have 57 customers, or my customer is the door team, my customer is the tire team, right? It's confusing. So you lose that focus on the customer, that empirical focus on the ability to have transparency. You don't have a good measure of progress, right? So for example, the window team may be done, but the engine team's not. So you don't have, it's a little confusing where the progress, how am I doing, right? Teams that don't have as much work to do may have to invent work, quality from those handoffs. And it also limits the ability of teams to self-organize to deliver the work, which is, I guess, I gotta tell you, near and dear to my heart. It's not something we're gonna talk about a lot today, but being able to self-organize is an important aspect of a great team. All right, so we're gonna move on to our next of 4 signs of not embracing empiricism and using Scrum as window dressing. So this one I think is really important. Are you delivering value frequently and incrementally? What do I mean by that? So the Scrum guide says we deliver value iteratively, which means frequently, and incrementally. What do I mean by incremental delivery? I think that's a lot of syllables. That's a lot of syllables for a morning class, right? So I've got some pictures that are going to help us figure out what does incremental delivery mean. Incremental means whatever I deliver is fully working. So just a couple of analogies, and we're going to have some real examples later, but just to give you an understanding, right? Incremental means whatever I deliver is fully working. So if you look at some traditional methods, I may have, a hexagon that I'm trying to deliver, and I'm trying to deliver in one go. But if I'm trying to deliver that hexagon agilely, I might deliver the hexagon in a lot of little pieces, but every little piece is a hexagon. Every little piece can be used as a hexagon. It's not the whole hexagon I was looking for, but it is usable. And so that's why I really love this analogy, this idea of what I'm delivering is complete and it's usable. It's not the whole house, but maybe it's a tent, right? It's not the whole car, but maybe it's a bicycle. So this idea of delivering something that's fully usable. Another example, right, of what I mean by incremental delivery is the idea of a sandwich. So let's say, right, you have to deliver a mile-long peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I don't know why you would, but maybe you do. So if you had to deliver a mile-long peanut butter and jelly sandwich, questionable, but if you did, if you were to deliver that in a waterfall method, you might deliver the bread, right, or at least work on the bread, right, and then you might work on the peanut butter and very efficiently kind of going through that. If you were to deliver this using Agile, you would deliver a complete sandwich to your customer and then another complete sandwich. You might deliver this in bites that is end to end. Another example, I do have several examples we're going to walk through because I think this is such an important concept that I think it's worth the time to go through this. Another example of what do I mean by incremental delivery is if you think of this from the waterfall, from the software development lifecycle standpoint. Using a waterfall or traditional method, you might plan, analyze, design, build in these long phases that could take months, right? It could take a month or two to plan, could take a month or two to analyze, 6 months to design, right? 6 months to build, test, these long kind of phases. Well, we do all those phases with Agile. We just do them a lot shorter, a lot in smaller little bite size. So we'll be planning, then we'll plan a little bit of the product, then we'll test, build, design, analyze, right? All in one sprint. We're going to review it at the sprint review meeting, and then we're going to plan again in our next sprint. So we're breaking up the work smaller. It's all there. We're still doing all those things. I'd say with Agile methods, we actually plan more because we're planning continuously. We're not planning just for that sprint. We're planning, how long is it going to take to get there based on the data. And we're going to talk about forecasting in a minute here. But with Agile, you really plan more. So another example, because we're talking about iterative incremental delivery, what does that mean? Another example is if you had to build a web form, right? A real example here, and this is actually from a real project that I've done, slightly exaggerated, but still. If you had to deliver a web form that had 5,000 fields, right? So that's where the exaggeration comes in. With the traditional method, you might build the database, you might build the data integration layer, and then finally you would build the user interface. But the customer doesn't get anything to the very end. If you were to deliver that iteratively and incrementally, you might build a web form that had 5 fields or 4 fields, and it completely works. It just has those first few fields, and then you deliver the next few, and then you deliver the next few. But whatever you deliver fully works. It's been tested, it saves to the database, it has the user interface for those 5 fields. It's really important, right? There's a lot of benefits for this iterative incremental delivery. It improves predictability, and it also reduces risks. So for example, what I mean by that is, what if, right, at the very end, we find out that there's a security issue or whatever it is? We would find that out earlier if we were to deliver this incrementally than if we were to deliver this using more traditional methods. The customer also gets value sooner. The customer can start to use that field, that form. It may have just 4 of the 5,000 fields, but it's still usable, can be used. So that's another example. My final kind of example comes from the Applying Professional Scrum class. And it just talks about iterative incremental delivery, right? So with traditional methods, you might have one delivery at the end. With Scrum, you might have frequent deliveries as we go, right? And if there's market shifts as we come along, or new techniques that come available, or disruptive events, we can shift gears. We can change our focus, and maybe even change our goals based on those events. So there's a lot more flexibility when you deliver this way. We don't have a lot of sunk cost where we say, well, we've already built this database with 5,000 fields. We're committed. With Scrum, we can change direction a lot more easily because we don't have those sunk costs, or even with all Agile methods. My final kind of example, right, of what I mean by incremental delivery is this one with the squares, right? Very similar to our hexagon example, where you're delivering something and then you're adding to it and you're adding to it and you're adding to it. So I'm going to pause and ask, before we talk about how incremental delivery impacts empiricism, I want to pause and ask you all, which one of those examples resonated with you? Which one made the most sense to you? So we're going to open up a poll and get your feedback on this one. So there's the hexagon, right? Remember the little 6-sided figure. There was a sandwich example. There was the software development lifecycle where we had, plan, build, test, analyze, all that together. There's the web form with the 5,000 fields. There's what I call the Scrum dots from the Applying Professional Scrum class. It's a really great class. And then there's the squares example, where we're building upon what's been delivered previously, but we're reaching always towards our product goal. With each incremental delivery, kind of going back to that sprint goal, it's a step towards the product goal.
Okay, as those come in, so there are a ton of questions that are coming in. Audience, just so you know, if we do not have time for all these, they will all be shared with Mary afterward to address. So don't worry about that. This question comes from Greg. The Scrum Guide doesn't refer to minimum viable product. How does MVP relate to the product goal?
Great question.
And he adds some more context here too. What are some ways that I can, as the team Scrum Master in the sprint review and the team retrospective event, not just to lead the developers in inspection and adaptation of the how, but also lead the product owner in the inspection and adaptation of the product goal?
Okay, fantastic. Great question. So a lot there. I'm going to start first with minimum viable product. So you're correct. Minimum viable product is not mentioned in the Scrum Guide. For those of you who don't know, it's actually fairly obvious from the name itself, right? It's the minimum viable amount of work that I can put together in order to release the product or for it to be useful to our customer. So Scrum does talk about iterative incremental delivery, and that's what we're talking about today. It also mentions in the Scrum guide that, so we're delivering work this way, but at each sprint, we're delivering a useful, potentially releasable increment. But the product owner is the individual who decides, when do we actually release? And it's the product owner who makes that decision. The product owner who says, well, it's great that we built these four fields, but I don't want to release it to the customer because I'll get slammed on, the App Store, for example. So I might wait to deliver it. And it's the product owner who decides when to actually release. So while the term minimal viable product is not actually mentioned in the Scrum guide, it emerges from the idea of the roles, from the idea that the product owner decides when to release. The product owner is the one who decides, when is my minimum set of features ready, such that I can release. And then to your other question, how do you how do you make sure that the team is inspecting the product goal? Is that what the question was?
What are some ways, what are some ways that I can, as the team Scrum Master in the sprint review and team retrospective, not just leave the developers in the inspection and adaptation of the how, but also lead the product owner in the inspection and adaptation of the product goal?
Okay. So the product goal, for those of you who don't know, every product should have one product goal at a time. When they have reached that product goal, they can choose another, or when they decide to abandon it, they can choose another. And a great way to know, how we're doing against the product goal is to think about some metrics, to set some metrics that measure progress against the product goal. So those metrics, the selection of them is very important. We discussed that in professional Agile leadership. What makes a good metric? We also discussed that in the evidence-based management class. What makes a good metric? That selection of metrics is very important. You want to measure what is the value that we're delivering, and how are we progressing against it. So the metrics that you select are going to be very specific to your product. And so my answer to that question is, how do you inspect the goal? Is select some good metrics and measure your progress against them. Select metrics that also measure things like customer satisfaction. And you can determine whether that goal is actually increasing customer satisfaction. If you see that I'm making good progress to the goal, but my customer satisfaction is decreasing, that's when you might want to think about selecting a new goal. And that's something you can discuss in your retrospective as a team. All right, so I think we've probably had enough time to close out the poll. I'm very interested to see which one of these things resonates with all of you.
Okay, there are results.
Okay, software develop. It looks like the hexagon. You know what? That's my favorite too. So I'm really glad you guys picked that. But it was a close race, I must say, closer than I expected. So the hexagon wins by a narrow margin. Software development lifecycle looks like it came in number 2. The web form, probably the most practical of all of them, that really, to me, I get it, that it makes sense. It's got a practical, was the third one. The sandwich was number 4. I kind of thought that would be the last one because it's kind of a weird picture. And then the squares was the loser by far. Okay, thank you all for participating in that. I appreciate your feedback on that. All right, so we've talked a lot about what is iterative and what is incremental. Iterative is frequent delivery. Incremental is delivering something that's done and usable. But how does that impact, right? Coming back to our goal, right? How does that impact empiricism? Why does this matter? And how does this get us away from window dressing Scrum? Well, actually, delivering a done usable product is the main purpose of the sprint. It's the most meaningful measure of progress. If we're not delivering a done usable product, then we're not having transparency. We're not showing our customer what's being delivered. The customer can't really inspect a product that's not done or usable. It can't truly be inspected at the sprint review meeting. So, for example, if I was to deliver the sandwich is coming to mind. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go with the sandwich. If I was to deliver a piece of bread, right, at the sprint review, they can't really inspect that as a sandwich. It's not meaningful. So it really impacts transparency. It impacts our ability to inspect the product, and therefore impacts our ability to adapt based on what we've seen. So this done usable increment is extremely important for empiricism. If we're not delivering a done usable increment, we're having a huge impact on our ability to inspect and adapt the work. So if your team, right, I think it's important that, I talk about why it matters, but I should also give you some tools to solve the problem. If you're not able to deliver a done usable increment, what should you do? So I think the first answer is go back and talk about what your product is. And once you've defined what your product is, make sure that your team that is delivering that product is truly cross-functional. So do I have a team that together has all the skills necessary to deliver that product? So if my product is the sandwich, do I have bakers? Do I have confectioners to make the jelly? Do I have whoever makes the peanut butter? Do I have all of those people on the team? Or if my team is more software developed based, do I have all the components that are necessary? DBAs, developers, testers, whoever it is, based on how you define your product and the capabilities you want your product to have. Do I have a team that has all those skills to deliver that product? So I think that's really important. And that really kind of concludes our section on, again, iterative incremental delivery. So we've talked about defining the product. We've talked about iteratively, incrementally delivering value. The next thing I want to talk about that really impacts empiricism is forecasting, which I think can be sort of a dramatic or controversial topic potentially with Scrum teams. Yes, we should be able to forecast. Scrum, in the Scrum guide, it actually says, and I'm quoting here, Scrum employs an iterative, incremental approach to optimize predictability and control risk. Predictability means the ability to forecast. Well, there's a lot that goes into predictability, but predictability also implies that, yes, forecasting matters. Our ability to set and reach goals matters. That said, a forecast is not a guarantee. We need to make smart decisions as we go, but we do need to be able to forecast. And there's two main ways to forecast. You can forecast scope delivery. When am I going to deliver? How much scope am I able to deliver by a certain date? You can forecast by date in terms of when am I going to be able to deliver this scope? So it's a subtle difference. There's lots of ways to forecast. All have their pluses and minuses. You can forecast with hours estimation, or you can forecast using relative estimation. You can forecast using flow metrics. There's lots of ways to forecast. There's lots of tools to communicate that forecast to the customer. You can use burn-up charts, which really is a chart that shows, here's all the work that I have remaining, here's the work that's closed, and it has it in a graph over time, which I personally really like that one. You can use a roadmap, which shows, here's where I'm projecting to release or deliver certain functionality projected over time. So that roadmap, literally, kind of on my first screen there, that you can show my target dates by quarter, month, whatever it is. The cumulative flow diagram is another way. Burn downs, burn ups, all different ways, lots of ways to forecast. All of those are legitimate. It's up to the product owner to decide what tool he or she wants to use to communicate that forecast to their customers. But it is important, right? There's this common idea that we don't forecast, we don't plan in Scrum, but the opposite is true. We plan more with Agile methods than we do with waterfall methods, because we're constantly evaluating, okay, every sprint, I plan to deliver this much. How much did I really deliver? How does that impact my larger forecast? Where am I at? So we're constantly thinking about that. So that ability to forecast is actually very important. And forecasting clearly impacts empiricism. It impacts transparency because a forecast provides predictability to our external customers. It allows us to inspect how, if we have a forecast, we can inspect progress against that forecast. Are we meeting the dates? And it allows us to adapt. So any deviation from forecast that's significant should be discussed at the sprint retrospective. So the team can have some root cause analysis discussions. Why is it that we're not meeting our forecast? Do we need to change? Is it the forecast itself that's at fault, or are we not being consistently delivering? It can be either one. It can be, it can be either one. It's up to the team to have that discussion. So the forecast is important. It is an important part, and it does impact empiricism. So I want to take this time for another poll, right? Is your team creating a reliable forecast? When I say team, is your product owner pulling together, working with the team to create this reliable forecast that's shared with your customer, internal or external customers?
Okay, and while we're waiting for that, we'll take another quick question here. Do you need a fully populated and estimated product backlog to forecast effectively?
Great question. So if we go back to what is Scrum founded upon, it's empiricism and also lean. So lean, if you have your entire product backlog estimated, right, that could be wasteful. That depending on the size of your product backlog, that could be a lot of effort, right? So you don't need to estimate your entire product backlog, but you do need to have, there's a balance to be had here. And that balance is depending upon, it depends upon each product. So no, you don't have to. There's three main ways to kind of, if you go back to estimating, right? You can estimate based on flow. If my product backlog items are roughly equal sized, I can estimate that I'll have 30 of them done, because I delivered 10 on a regular basis every sprint. So you can estimate based on flow is one way to do it. You can estimate based on relative sizing, which means you would have to estimate a certain percent of your backlog to figure out how far we're gonna get there, and then dates, which I think is a little bit more difficult. The answer is you don't have to have your entire product backlog estimated. Use your own judgment. If you are trying to deliver a certain scope by a certain time, you may need to have a sense of how much approximately points we're talking about. And you need to have maybe a sense of how many points you can close on a regular basis to get together your forecast, but you don't want to estimate your whole product backlog, is where I'm going with this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
It does. So the results are pretty much in.
Okay.
So I'm gonna end and then share.
Okay. 64% say no, they're not presenting a reliable forecast. And 36% say yes. So not surprising. I think that with newer teams, forecasting can be difficult. In order to put together a reliable forecast, you first have to have, kind of a certain amount of predictability in terms of being able to meet your sprint goal. I am going to be releasing an article in a couple of weeks with some tools on forecasting. So check out our blog in the next couple of weeks. Go to scrum.org/Mary-Iqbal. I think in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be releasing some tools on how to forecast. So check that out. But it is an important thing. It's something that I encourage teams to work on because it does impact our relationship with the customer. It helps our ability to build trust. I think if you're newer to forecasting, don't overpromise. And work on predictability for your Scrum team so that you can have a better sense of, how fast we're moving. The other thing is incremental delivery really is going to be helpful. If you're delivering something that's done, you're going to find that your velocity is less variable if you're delivering something that's done every sprint. So think about that as well. All right. So our final sign of Scrum being used as window dressing is near and dear to my heart. They all are, but this one just is really, it's so important. A sign that you are using Scrum as window dressing is that events are not resulting in adaptation. So for example, the daily Scrum. The daily Scrum is an event that is required for the developers, and it's a daily touch point-based meeting where the developers inspect and adapt progress towards the sprint goal. If you are not using this event to really talk about how it's going and to adapt your plan accordingly, you may be pretending to be Agile. You may be using Scrum as window dressing. I know it's easy to come in there and ask the 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What did you do today? And do you have impediments? And that can become sort of mechanical, where you're not really inspecting and adapting, you're just kind of checking the boxes. So make sure that you're using that Scrum to really talk about, how are we doing? Are we on track to meet the sprint goal? And if not, what are changes that we need to make? It is okay to collaborate and say, well, this item was lower priority. We're not doing too well in the sprint. Let's have a conversation with our product owner about maybe pulling this work out so we can focus in on what really matters for the sprint. That conversation is okay. It's okay to be proactive about it. But inspect and adapt progress. Or, right, another kind of example, a little bit more happy path example. We're doing well, right? We're on progress to meet the sprint goal. What are the things that we need to do to maintain our velocity or to maintain our progress? Do we need to be making sure that we're working on the work instructions, right? So just that collaborative and making sure that we're doing good on the sprint, and you're inspecting, you're adapting, you're not just checking the boxes. You're really talking about, how's it going and what can we do to increase our likelihood of meeting the sprint goal? Are there any things that we've missed? Have we forgot to do something? So it's an important inspect and adapt event. The sprint review is another more obvious example of our ability to inspect and adapt. So the sprint review, it should include a discussion of what to do next. It shouldn't just be a demo. You should certainly demo, right? You can demo what you've delivered or what you've built in this current sprint. But you should also include a discussion about what to do next. So I have lately been ending my sprint review meetings with a conversation on, how's it going, customer? Is there anything that we can do better next time? I actually do ask the question, what's going well, what's not going well, and what can be improved? That's a traditional sprint retrospective question, but I ask my customer that at the sprint review from their perspective. What's going well? What are you liking about what we're delivering? So the sprint review it's an important meeting. However you do it, you need to have a discussion of what to do next and collaborate upon the product backlog. Review the forecast, talk about how it's going, and use that as a key inspect and adapt opportunity. The final event we're going to talk about, although all the events do impact empiricism, I've called out these three. The sprint retrospective is an important inspect and adapt event. It should result in actionable improvements. There's lots of ways. I did a great article on this. Lots of ways on how you can facilitate that sprint retrospective. One of my favorite is what's going well, what's not going well, and ideas for improvement. But however you facilitate that discussion, the Scrum Master should ensure that it's positive, and should also ensure that it happens, right? And that it results in actionable improvements. So for example, if your team is using this effectively, you will not recognize yourself in 6 months. Scrum reveals your problems and gives you the opportunity to solve them. And this is your opportunity to really talk about, how's it going for the team? What are the problems that we're having? And inspect yourselves as a team. And adapt. So it's important that your sprint retrospective results in actionable improvements. You can add those to the sprint backlog for the next sprint. You don't have to, but however you track those, make sure that you're actually acting upon those, and that you're taking steps. If you don't do this, I don't want to say it's a tragedy, but it's a loss, right? It impacts your ability to continuously improve, and it's really important that you're doing this. And I have seen teams go for years, right? Even not doing this, right? Or I've heard of teams going for years not doing this. And it's such a lost opportunity. If you do this effectively, your team will not recognize yourself in 6 months. So definitely use this to identify those actionable improvement ideas. It's not just a vent session. It's a session where we're actually identifying actionable improvements. I didn't talk specifically about the sprint planning meeting, and I didn't talk about the sprint itself, but each one of those does have its impact on empiricism, but we are limited time. So I want to take a moment here and ask, just kind of picking on the sprint retrospective, does your sprint retrospective result in actionable improvements? So this is a moment for reflection for each of you. Think about this. Are you really taking improvement actions based on your sprint retrospective? No questions this time?
Oh, we have a lot of questions.
Okay. All right.
Here is a Scrum Master specific question. How can I, as a Scrum Master, lead the team in a forecast of when we will meet the product goal without leading the team to revert from a product mindset to a project mindset?
Great question. So I'm trying to think of how I want to exactly put that. How can you lead them to meet the product goal? I think there's lots of ways we could go with this. That's kind of why I'm pausing for a moment. I think what you can do is you're discussing your product goal. You're looking at your metrics, but it's not a project-based thing if we're continually evaluating those metrics and inspecting and adapting. So if you're looking at, at the sprint review, for example, let's imagine that your product is, to build a insurance application, right? That works well. And your goal is to make this very usable insurance application, and your shopping cart abandonment is 50% or even 75%, or 80%, some high, very, very high number. I don't know what a good number for that is. You're inspecting that at your sprint retrospective and your sprint review meeting, and you're adapting. So I think that very inspection and adaptation makes that an agile process. So that's what I would encourage you to do, is find metrics that measure progress towards that sprint goal, and use those metrics as an opportunity to inspect and adapt. And you will not therefore be doing kind of the traditional methods. That is an agile method. So embracing empiricism, right? Great question. All right. I think we probably have enough for this one.
Yeah.
All right.
So let me share.
Okay. So does your sprint retrospective result in actionable improvements? 68% say yes. Fantastic. That is great. Keep up the good work is kind of my response to you. And then if you're saying no, 30%, think about, for those of you who are Scrum Masters, the facilitation of this event is important. So think about asking questions that are more likely to result in actionable improvements. So that's why I really like the what's going well, what's not going well, and then ideas for improvement. That's the money section, right? That's the part where we're really identifying. It's great that we know what's not going well, but how do we fix it? And then let's try one of those. You may come up with, when you come to the how do we fix it conversation, you may get 20 ideas. You can't do all 20 realistically, probably. So pick the top one or two, have the team vote. What are the things we're going to try this sprint to improve ourselves? All right. So just great. So just kind of wrapping this up, right? How the events impact empiricism. Transparency, we all know what's going on. So each event is an opportunity to provide transparency to the artifacts, for example. Inspection means we're checking our work as we do it. So we're inspecting at the daily Scrum, we're inspecting at the sprint review, we're inspecting at the sprint retrospective. We're inspecting at sprint planning too. We're inspecting how much work have we been able to accomplish in previous sprints? Have we been, how are we doing in terms of our delivery? So we're inspecting really all the time, and adaptation, right? We're adapting it at all this, I would say at all the events. So we're adapting at sprint planning meeting, right? We weren't able to deliver a done increment last sprint. So we're gonna change how much work we pull in, maybe pull in less, but limit our work in progress. We're inspecting at all those events. Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. So I guess, I don't know if we really have time for one question.
I think we have time for one.
Okay.
But there are so many. So I'm going to ask this question because it came in a few different times. Some folks were asking, what are your thoughts on a mid-sprint review?
I would oppose that. I love where you're going with that. I love the thought. I love the idea that you had that idea. I think that's very interesting. But I would oppose that. I would use the Scrum events as they're designed. If you're thinking you need a mid-sprint review, then maybe your sprint's too long. There's a great video from one of the founders of Scrum that talks about the length of the sprint. And the sprint should be just long enough to deliver a done increment with a preference towards a shorter side. So if you have a very risky environment where either the customer's needs are changing or the product is very difficult to deliver, whatever it is, right? Shorter is better. So if you're thinking you need a sprint review, mid-sprint review, you might think about a shorter sprint. That being said, the product owner should be engaging with his or her stakeholders continuously. So there can be stakeholder meetings, there can be other ways to gather feedback. Doing refinement on the product backlog is a great thing to do during the sprint. So you're still engaging with your customers, but that formal review, the event, should just be once at the end of the sprint. But great question. I love that you thought of that. I think your heart's in the right place.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that because a few people had asked.
Okay.
So we have time for one more, I think. So
Yes.
do you have any advice for facilitating a daily scrum on a co-located team where there may be only 1 hour of overlap between the members of the team?
Okay. They are co-located. So in that case, actually, I think that's an easy problem to solve. They're co-located. There's an hour of overlap. I would recommend doing that daily scrum, towards the beginning of the time when there's overlap happening, so that if there are impediments identified, then those impediments can be discussed in a meeting after this daily scrum, maybe the 16th minute, right? But I recommend having that daily scrum earlier in that co-located time period. And then since you are co-located, it makes it very easy. You can do your daily scrum together around, if you're using a Kanban board, you can do the daily scrum right there. You can project it if you're using in some way you need to project your sprint backlog. That's where I'm going with this. Or you can project your sprint backlog, but just bring everybody together and ask the question, how's it going? You don't have to project your sprint backlog, but have that conversation together. How's it going? You can use the 3 questions. I do enjoy those. Just make sure it's not mechanical. Make sure that we're really talking about how's it going? Are we on track to meet the sprint goal? It's real easy if you're co-located, just bring them together and have the conversation just for 15 minutes. Don't let it go beyond 15 minutes though.
Stay within the time box.
Definitely important.
Okay. So I don't think we have time for any more questions. However, Mary, I will share this full list with you and then you can address the questions with these folks afterward. So I think it's time for us to close up.
Okay.
So just a little slide here with the scrum.org learning paths. Feel free to go check those out. There's a bunch of free resources like this webinar, also other videos, podcasts, white papers, case studies, all kinds of things. So feel free to go check those out. And stay connected. Stay connected with our community through our social media channels. We also run webinars like this 2 or 3 times a month. So feel free to check out the listing on our website and stay in touch on our blog. Mary blogs quite frequently too. And as she mentioned, she has something coming out on forecasting in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for that. And with that, I'll hand it to you, Mary, to close out.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I do want to say there's a lot of great classes on scrum.org. You can go to scrum.org and look at the training and take a look at these classes. Applying Professional Scrum is, I call it Scrum 101 and beyond. Professional Scrum Masters for Scrum Masters. PSPO, Professional Scrum Product Owner, is really dedicated or more focused on the product owner role. Professional Agile Leadership is really focused on leaders. The Scale Professional Scrum, talking about how do I scale? When I have 3 or more Scrum teams working together on a single product, how do I scale? Professional Scrum with Kanban is for those who are experienced in Scrum, how do I implement or work with some of the elements of Kanban? And then UX practitioners, product owners, and Scrum Masters is also a great class. With that, I would like to say thank you all so much for your time. I've really enjoyed being here with you today. I've enjoyed your questions. Please feel free to reach out to me at www.scrum.org/Mary-Iqbal or visit my website at rebelscrum.site. My email address is mary@rebelscrum.site. So please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time and have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.